By the time Wednesday arrived, the healing woman felt like she had been scraped thin by the world. The past 3 days had been consumed by work, long, arduous shifts full of clattering plates, rushed orders, and voices that overlapped and pulled at her until she could no longer tell which ones were real and which ones were echoes. Each night she had returned to her small apartment with aching legs and a ringing in her ears that no silence could quite erase. Her back hurt, her hands were sore from carrying too much, and her smile, something once warm and genuine, had become a reflex she wore like a mask, heavy and exhausting. She didn't speak a word that morning as she moved through her apartment. The dishes were still in the sink. A clean basket of laundry sat untouched by the door to her bedroom. Her son had already left for school, likely buried in his last few weeks of assignments and projects. She didn't text him to check in. She didn't respond to the unread messages from coworkers asking to trade shifts or family members checking in out of polite obligation. Instead, she brewed her tea, poured it into her favorite mug, and stood in the center of her quiet kitchen, sipping slowly and staring at the floor as if grounding herself before making a decision. That decision was simple. She needed to leave. Not for long. Not to run, but to breathe. The kind of breathing that only happened when she wasn't being watched, measured, or needed. She didn't want to see anyone. She didn't want to be seen. She wanted the woods, the wild things, the hush between trees, and most of all, she wanted the meadow. The drive to the preserve was silent, her car rolling over familiar roads with the windows cracked just enough to let in the soft hush of the breeze. The sun was angled westward now, hanging lower in the sky than usual for her walks. She hadn't left early, hadn't rushed to get out. There had been no urgency. Only the steady pull of a place that had begun to feel like a second body, one that could hold her when hers was too tired to hold itself. She stepped onto the trail with the quiet grace of someone who had learned how to move without disturbing anything. Her boots touched the earth gently, almost reverently, as she passed under the shade of the first row of maples. There were birds above her, she could hear them, but they sounded distant, like background music in a film where she was both the character and the audience. She walked the trail she knew by heart, past the marsh where dragonflies hovered like sparks above the water, past the lake still and patient, the turtles likely tucked on their usual logs. She didn't pause to greet them today. She kept going. Each step carried her closer to the meadow, and with every footfall, she felt another layer fall away, the forced kindness, the tension in her shoulders, the dull anger she held toward people who hadn't meant to harm her but had chipped away at her all the same. People who never saw the toll. People who never noticed that when she asked how they were doing, no one ever asked in return. When the trees opened and the field came into view, she stopped. Just for a moment. Just to take it in. The meadow, flooded with late afternoon light, looked as if it had bloomed for her alone. Tall grasses swayed gently, whispering against one another with every breath of wind. Wildflowers lifted their heads toward the sky, blues, yellows, whites, and soft purples dotting the landscape in unpracticed perfection. Butterflies drifted lazily from bloom to bloom, and bees moved without rush, working the milkweed with unhurried persistence. It wasn't silent here, but it was a silence of understanding, a silence that didn't need to be filled. She stepped off the path and entered the field without ceremony, letting the grass brush against her legs, tickling her hands. She didn't head toward the oak tree this time or reach for the blanket tucked in her bag. Instead, she lowered herself slowly into the grass, right where she stood, and lay back against the earth. The flowers bent gently around her body, and she stared up at the sky. An open canvas of pale blue brushed with white, the sun stretching golden fingers across the horizon. Her body ached with more than just fatigue. It ached with the effort of being strong, of showing up, of softening her voice for people who did not care to meet her softness with respect. It ached with the weight of being polite when she wanted to scream, of enduring the subtle cruelty of being overlooked, spoken over, or taken for granted. Her eyes burned, but she did not cry loudly or all at once. The tears came slowly, one after another, like rain against dry soil, cleansing, unhurried, and necessary. For a long time she simply lay there. The ground beneath her was firm, cool in places, warm in others. A red-winged blackbird called from a cluster of shrubs behind her, its voice high and reedy. She listened without moving, the call piercing the quiet in the way truth often does, startling and honest. A grasshopper landed near her shoulder and sat, unmoving, as if acknowledging her stillness. When she finally sat up, the light had deepened. The meadow had shifted slightly, colors richer now, shadows longer. She reached for her camera, which had rested untouched beside her in the grass, and turned it slowly in her hands. Then, without thinking, she lifted it and took a photo of the sky above the swaying flowers, the frame tilted upward. It wasn't artful. It wasn't posed. But it was real. She stood slowly, her joints stiff but her breath easier. The meadow didn't look back at her. Didn't need to. It had held her, and she had allowed herself to be held. That was enough. As she walked back through the trees, the world around her began to reassemble itself. Birds resumed their calls. A squirrel darted up a nearby trunk. A breeze rustled the branches overhead. But something inside her had shifted. Not everything had been healed, but something broken had been acknowledged. And that for now was more than enough. By the time she reached her car, the sun had dropped just enough to cast long beams across the parking lot. She slid into the seat, rolled the window down, and sat for a few moments with her hands resting in her lap. There was still work tomorrow, still noise, still people who wouldn't see her. But the meadow had, and that made all the difference.